Hey guys, it's Nosh here. We're in a legal secondary suite that I just finished developing, and I thought I would take a few moments to touch on the code requirements when developing a legal secondary suite. This will also apply if you plan on finishing your basement or finishing a space. Now before we get started, full disclaimer, I'm not an electrician, I'm not a plumber, I'm not an HVAC specialist, and I don't work for the City of Edmonton in their permit department. What I presented here is a guide for you as the viewer to take, absorb, and understand what might be required for your local area and municipality. It's always good practice and highly recommended that you as the viewer check with your local codes and guidelines as far as what's required so that you're ensuring you're doing the work safely, properly, and effectively. Now with that being said, let's get started. So right off the hop, from the edge of the kitchen sink on either side, you need a receptacle within the first 2 feet. And any receptacle that is within 4.5 feet from a sink basin needs to be GFI protected. That means that if it ever came into contact with water, it would shut itself off and be safe. To simply reset it, hit the reset button that is usually located on these receptacles. All countertop receptacles must be GFI protected. No space along the countertop area can any two receptacles be further than 4 feet apart. The reason for this is most countertop appliances, such as a coffee maker or a toaster, have an extension cord that's roughly 2 feet long. This allows you for maximum flexibility so that you can place that appliance anywhere on your countertop and be within reach of a receptacle without needing a further extension cord. And you must have a minimum of two 20-amp circuits located in the kitchen that service the receptacles. You can only have 2 receptacles per circuit. The receptacle cannot be higher than 20 inches from the countertop surface. Kitchen islands or peninsulas require at least 1 receptacle from the last 2 feet of that space, and it cannot be located lower than 12 inches from the top of the cabinet. Any receptacle that is mounted to the surface of a countertop has to be rated for damp locations, and it cannot be in the face-up position. In the event that in order to accommodate minimum code, you need to add a 5th receptacle in the kitchen, or in the event you decide you want a 5th receptacle in the kitchen, you will not be able to combine that with one of the 2 existing circuits. Simply because of that rule, you can only have 2 countertop receptacles per 20 amp circuit in the kitchen. So you'll need to run a 3rd circuit from the panel that is a 20 amp circuit to accommodate that 5th electrical receptacle. Furthermore, the first 9 square feet of a kitchen island requires a receptacle. Every 18 square feet thereafter requires an additional receptacle to service that space. Now, if you have a countertop that is less than 24 inches wide, you do not require a receptacle to service that space. But any countertop space along the entire countertop that is wider than 24 inches requires at least 1 receptacle. Throughout your home, all your receptacles are going to need to be protected with an arc fault breaker. However, the exception is a kitchen fridge. The kitchen fridge should not be on an arc fault breaker, as well as anything else that is GFI protected. You'll also need to have a receptacle within the last 24 inches from the edge of your countertop. So in this case, because we have a peninsula, we also need to have a receptacle within the last 2 feet of the peninsula itself. So we are covered from this side, and we are also covered from this side. Let's talk about smoke and carbon monoxide detectors here. They have to be wired, but they cannot be located within the kitchen area because anytime you start cooking, it's likely to go off. In this particular case, we have one just outside the kitchen area, which services the kitchen in case you had a kitchen fire. It gives you that early warning, but it also covers the living room area located directly in front of me. You're going to want a minimum of 3 feet in front of any cabinetry or appliance. If you have any gas appliances, you're going to need a dedicated shutoff valve or isolation valve as they call it. And it's going to need to be located in the same room, be easily accessible, and no further than 3 feet from the appliance in which it services. You're going to need a minimum of 30 inches in vertical height from the top of the stove to any combustibles. The exception is if you have a 1/4 inch insulated hood fan, you can reduce that measurement to a minimum of 24 inches in vertical height. For a plug-in microwave range hood, a dedicated 20 amp circuit is required. And for any range hood, a 6-inch vent is required, coming from the top of the range or the back of the range and vented directly to the outside, without being shared by any other venting system. A fridge, range hood, carburetor, dishwasher, or any other built-in appliance requires its own separate circuit. The reason for this, for example with the fridge, is older fridges didn't require that much electricity, so you might find them on the same circuit as other receptacles in older homes. New construction or remodel, however, does require that because new fridges come bigger. They also have a lot more electronics involved. There might be a screen that's digital, there might be a knocking system to illuminate the light, so on and so forth. So they require their own dedicated circuit. And lastly, before we wrap up the kitchen area, the return air cannot be closer than 10 feet from the kitchen range. The reason why is that any odors or off gases or fumes should not be allowed to recirculate throughout the home before the range hood has sufficient amount of time to exhaust it to the outdoors. The minimum space required for a living room area is 145 square feet. Now, the moment you enter the room or area, there needs to be a receptacle located within the first 6 feet. From that receptacle along the wall line, there must be another receptacle located within 12 feet and thereafter. This means that if I was to stand directly in the middle of one receptacle to another, there should be neither side that is longer than 6 feet. Now, this is just minimum code. It doesn't speak to best practices or luxury home builds. In this setup, for example, this is a featured TV wall. Your receptacles must be at least 12 inches off the surface of the finished floor. The reason for this is so that if there's any pool of water or flood or leakage, it doesn't compromise your electrical system and potentially start a fire. Keep in mind that in order for a receptacle to be considered a wall receptacle to service that space and meet minimum code, there's a height requirement that you cannot exceed. For example, this receptacle on the wall would not count in the minimum receptacles I would require within a 12-foot spacing. Now, all receptacles must be tamper resistant. It's actually quite hard to find a receptacle nowadays that's not tamper resistant. What tamper resistant means is that both prongs need to be inserted into the device in order for the receptacle to energize whatever is being plugged in. It's a safety feature so that if a kid is trying to stick a knife or a fork inside the receptacle, it's designed to protect them, which is also why you have an arc fault breaker so that if it senses any unusual current within the system, it's designed to trip the breaker and not harm the individual. Any wall that is longer than 2 feet must be serviced by at least one receptacle. So even though you could enter this room and get to this receptacle within 6 feet, because this wall here is obviously longer than 2 feet, it does require a receptacle. If you have what's called a gap in the wall, which is something along the lines of a floor-to-ceiling type cabinetry that's permanently fixed in place, that's going to constitute a gap in the wall, and you're going to need a receptacle within the first 6 feet thereafter, and of course 12 feet and so on and so forth as per minimum code. Some homes might have glass panels spanning the length of the wall. In that case, if they're fixed and cannot be moved, you do still require a receptacle. Typically, this is done by putting a floor receptacle no further away than 18 inches from the surface of that glass panel. You're going to want to consult with an HVAC professional to make sure that your living spaces are adequately heated. In this particular case, I have a 5-inch heat register attached to the ceiling in this room as well as on the other side of the room. If a heat register is located in front of a window, it's usually found to be 2 feet in front of the window and to the center. When it comes to air loss, you usually get that air leakage around any doors and windows. So placing a heat register in front of the window and 2 feet from the window ensures that you can counter-battle that heat loss and also ensures that the window doesn't freeze in the wintertime. Any hallway that's longer than 10 feet in length is going to require a minimum of one receptacle. The width of a hallway is minimum 2 feet 8 inches. However, even at 3 feet in width, it still can feel a little bit claustrophobic. And for that reason, when I develop legal suites, I usually stick to 3 feet minimum for the hallway width. That 3 feet in clearance gives you enough space to comfortably fit mattresses and furniture down into the basement and move them to the appropriate locations. You will need a minimum of 1 light within the stairwell, as well as a smoke detector, typically at the top of the stairwell. The light will need to be controlled through 3-way switches so that you can turn it on from the top of the stairwell and turn it off at the bottom of the stairwell, and vice versa. All stairwells are going to require a minimum of at least 1 handrail, and the vertical height from the top of the stair tread to the top of the handrail has to be between 31.5 to 38 inches. Also, the height from the top of the stair tread to the ceiling has to be a minimum of 80 inches. Of course, we all know that every legal secondary suite is going to require its own separate entrance. However, if it has its own separate entrance, you don't require a door at the bottom of the stairs. If, on the other hand, the stairwell led up to a main floor unit and there was another door up there leading to that main floor unit, you may be required to have a permanently fixed door in place, and that's to create a completely separate unit. Light switches are going to be required anytime you enter a room, and you're going to need a light switch at the start of every hallway, as well as the end of every hallway. Now remember, minimum code does not address best practices or luxury builds. In this particular case, we have a stairwell, which is the entry and exit to this basement unit, somewhere around midway in this hallway. In order to prevent a tenant from having to turn on or off the light from all the way there or all the way there before leaving or entering his or her property, I added a 4-way switch right here in the center. What that does is gives more flexibility to whoever is enjoying this space. Now, in order for a bedroom to be considered a bedroom, it must have 3 simple things. First, it must be a minimum of 70 to 80 square feet. That's roughly 7 feet, measuring from wall to wall and from wall to wall. It must also have an egress window. An egress window has a specific measurement. It must have a minimum unobstructed area of 3.8 square feet and must have a minimum of 15 inches clearance in any which direction. The window needs to be easily accessible and be able to open directly to the outdoors without any special tools or any special knowledge. The reason why is in the event of a fire, someone needs to be able to climb out this window and be able to get themselves safely outside without any disruption. When designing your bedroom, it's important to take into consideration the actual size of the bed, so that way you can have a feel for the layout and how much space is required. Here's a list of all the different beds and their appropriate dimensions that you might need. And here's how you can like and subscribe. See how I got it in there? Now, something you'll also need to consider is that a king-size bed will come in 2 separate pieces for the box spring. They don't actually make them that big. Well, unless you go luxury builds. However, a queen-size bed, sure, you have the rail system. Some queen-size box springs, however, do come as a 1-piece unit, measuring typically 60 inches by 80 inches. So you will actually need to accommodate a 60 by 80 frame that can make its way down the stairwell, down the hallway, and into the bedroom. So keep all that in mind when planning the dimensions and the sizes of each and every single space. The third thing that all bedrooms require is a built-in closet. Now, the light is not necessarily required. When we're talking about closet spaces, it's important to note that you cannot have any kind of pendant lighting. That's any kind of light that has a socket and you can twist a light bulb into. The reason why is if I had one up here and I tried to fit storage boxes up on top of the shelving, I run the risk of damaging the light, getting injured by the glass falling in my face. For that reason, you might decide you might not want to put a light in the closet, or use a surface mounted flush light, or use a low voltage LED light, which actually doesn't even have a bulb, it runs on little diodes. Carbon monoxide and smoke detectors are required inside as well as outside every bedroom. Have to be hardwired, and they have to work in tandem and sync with all other smoke detectors within the home. So what that looks like is if this smoke detector went off, all other smoke detectors, even in the utility room, the main floor, the top of the stairwell, and if there was a second floor to this property, those smoke detectors would have to go off as well. They all have to work in tandem for the simple reason that if there was a fire in the basement and the occupants upstairs were on the second floor, they would need to know about it to be able to rush themselves and their children to safety. All bedrooms are required to have at least one heat register, as well as a fresh air return, usually somewhere on the wall. If you have a light in the center of a room, even if it doesn't have a fan, at the rough-in stage, you will require what's called a fan box. It's a specific type of housing designed to support the weight of a fan in the event this light was to be changed and a fan was to go into place. If you have a room where the door opens into the room, then you should not have a receptacle behind the door. However, if the wall carries on, then you would require a receptacle 6 feet thereafter. In this case, because of the closet, we don't have one. A receptacle is required within 3 feet of every sink basin, and the receptacle must be GFI protected. Every bathroom is going to require a fan, and every fan needs to be directly vented to the outside. It doesn't matter if there's a window or not existing within the bathroom, you still are going to require a bathroom fan. Usually the bathroom fan is serviced by a 4-inch in diameter aluminum duct. Every finished space needs to be heated, and in this case the bathroom is no exception. We have a 5-inch in diameter heat register servicing this bathroom alone. However, we could have chosen to do in-floor heating, or we could have chosen another heating method that is approved by your local municipality. If you have a forced air system in your legal basement suite, such as a furnace, you're going to be required to have installed a fresh air damper, usually located in the utility room. Now, this fresh air damper needs to be in sync with the bathroom fan. If you have multiple bathrooms, only one bathroom fan is required to be synced with this fresh air damper. So the way it's set up is that this bathroom fan is controlled by a switch on the wall. Now, from that switch to a switch on the opposite side of the wall needs to be a 3-way wire, so that way you can properly control this damper mechanically. It's best to leave the switch on the wall in the off position. If it's in the on position, it could set your fan going 24/7 until you flick the switch off. A lot of people will get confused by this because the switch is not always located next to the bathroom, and as a result, they'll see a switch on the wall and not know what it's controlling. Any switch that is within 3 feet from a water source needs to be at minimum GFI protected. It's not best practice to put a switch close to a water source such as this, simply because if someone was showering, standing in a body of water, and for some reason decided to reach over and be able to reach the switch, unless it was GFI protected, it could be very dangerous and potentially fatal. If you have the opportunity to relocate that switch, it's best that you do so somewhere where you cannot reach it from standing within a shower. This is a look inside the utility or mechanical room, as they call it. So here we have our furnace for the upstairs. Excuse the mess. And here we have our furnace for the basement. So when you look at passing your inspection, they're going to want to see a startup sheet that is typically provided by your HVAC professional who installs the furnace. The gas line has to be grounded. There has to be a ground wire on the gas line going into the electrical panel. Sometimes you might find it on the gas line to the water meter, which is located behind here. Tankless hot water tank. You'll have green sticker most of the time when you pass an inspection, but it's not always required nowadays. Usually you will find one on the panel. This utility room, you'll notice, has plywood all around the electrical panel. However, any pockets that might have any kind of gaps are stuffed with Roxol insulation. Outside of that, it's drywall all around the walls with at least one coat of mud. Notice how within the utility room or mechanical room, all the ceiling has been drywalled. This is not by fluke or accident. This is required now. So the best way to do this is before you start putting everything in your mechanical room, like your plumbing, your electrical, your HVAC, etc., go ahead and drywall the floor joists as best as you can. Put the corner bead on. Make sure everything is properly sealed with tape and mud and drywall and corner bead, and then carry on putting all your mechanical and etc. equipment together. It's the easiest way to do it that way, as opposed to coming back after the fact and trying to do all of it then. The distance between the property and any fence or the property line must be greater than 6 feet in order to accommodate a legal secondary suite. From the termination point of an exhaust, from the furnace or the water tank, to any fence or property line has to be greater than 8 feet. In this case, because we didn't have that 8 feet of clearance, we angled it 45 degrees so that way we could meet minimum code. Lastly, I want to talk to you about permits and inspections. For a legal secondary suite, you're going to need a building and development permit. You're also going to need an HVAC permit, a plumbing and gas permit. If you require any gas work, another plumbing and gas permit, an electrical permit, as well as a final inspection at the end of everything. So the way that looks is after your building and development permit has been approved and you can start actually working in your basement, what you're going to do is you're going to have all the HVAC taken care of first. It's the bigger equipment. It needs to go where it needs to go. The professionals are going to come in and do that work first. Then you'll have your rough-in HVAC inspection. After you pass the rough-in HVAC inspection, you're going to have your plumber come in and take care of all the plumbing rough-in. You're then going to have what's called the plumbing rough-in inspection. Normally, for a legal secondary suite here in Edmonton, Alberta, we don't actually have a final plumbing inspection. Sometimes that can lead to a little bit of a confusion, but there technically is no final plumbing inspection. The reason why is after the rough-in plumbing has been inspected and you go ahead and finish the suite, if there's a leak coming from a sink, you're going to likely have to call a plumber to fix it. It's not up to the inspector to determine whether it's leaking or not. With that being said, at the rough-in inspection, if the inspector determines that there's some reason why he might want to see a final plumbing inspection, he can absolutely request it and you'll be required to comply with a final plumbing inspection. If you touch the gas line whatsoever, you're going to need to pull a plumbing and gas permit. Remember, you as a homeowner can work on your own gas line. However, we're talking about carbon monoxide here. So it's important that you know exactly what you're doing. And if there's any doubt for any of these steps, any of this work, always consult with a professional. Otherwise, it could lead to costly and, more importantly, potentially fatal consequences. Your rough-in gas inspection applies to all the gas lines that you've touched leading up to the service valve or the shutoff valve. After you pass your rough-in gas inspection, then you can go ahead and hook up the gas line into the appliance and call for your final gas inspection, to which once they pass, you're good to go. Next, you'll have your electrical rough-in inspection. At this stage, the inspector wants to see that all the wires are run into all the respective boxes, switch boxes, receptacle boxes, light switches, all the wires for pot lights are in place, etc. But you cannot have those wires hooked up inside the panel as yet. If the wires are brought inside the panel before your rough-in inspection, it will fail inspection. Next, you'll have your pre-board inspection. The inspector will come in and look at everything and want to see that everything is properly insulated, all the plumbing is in its right place, all your inspections that you had up to that point have been passed, and you're ready to hang drywall. They'll also be checking to see what kind of soundproofing and fire-rated properties you have used and will be using. So that might include resilient channels, or that might include Sonopan, or any kind of other approved building material. Now here in Edmonton, Alberta, we don't have Sonopan already approved, but it is an amazing product nonetheless. Now once your pre-board inspection has passed, you're ready to go and start hanging drywall. Go ahead and finish all your spaces, and when you're ready, you'll have a final HVAC inspection. They'll want to check the fresh air damper is working properly the way it's intended to. That means your electrical will also need to be hooked up into the panel, and you'll also be able to call for your final electrical inspection. Unless specified otherwise, you would have already passed your final gas inspection and your final plumbing inspection at the rough-in stage before you hung drywall. So there won't be a need to call in an inspector for those items. And lastly, you're going to need your final building inspection. That's where the inspector will come in, and he'll want to pay close attention inside the utility room. The entire utility room needs to be cocooned and sealed off. That means you need drywall above the ceiling. You need drywall on either side of the doors, in front, on the walls. Everything needs at least one coat of mud, and all the corners need to have a corner bead that's mudded in its place. If you have the electrical panel mounted onto plywood, then you can have that wall finished with plywood. However, anywhere you can stuff rock solid insulation as a fire resistant material, go ahead and shove a bat inside there, because that's what the inspectors are going to be looking for. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch my video. I hope you liked it, and I hope you learned something. If you did, hit the like and subscribe button down below. It helps me to grow my channel and continue putting out great content for you guys. Leave me a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you.